Welcome to the True Detectives podcast. I'm Adrian.
And I'm Julia.
And every week we take you on an investigation.
That's right.
Into some really bizarre,
Absolutely.
true stories about detectives.
Yeah.
Those head-scratching cases.
Yeah.
And all the unexpected twists and turns.
Absolutely.
That kind of blur the line.
Yeah.
Between fact and outright mystery.
Totally.
So if you're into true crime and tales of real-life detectives doing strange things, well, then you're in the right place.
For sure.
Make sure you rate and follow the show so you don't miss any of our future investigations.
Yeah. Can't miss those.
All right, Julia.
Yes.
Today, we're not just scratching the surface. We are going deep.
Love it.
Into two investigations that really take the familiar tropes of crime and twist them in ways you might not expect.
Sounds good.
So let's get started. Our film investigation takes us to the small town of Briarwood.
Briarwood. Okay.
Now imagine this. The town is gripped by fear.
Okay.
Not of a typical criminal,
Right?
but of a werewolf.
A werewolf.
A werewolf.
Like right out of a classic horror film.
Exactly.
What sparked this panic?
Well, it all started with livestock killings,
Okay.
particularly bad around the full moon.
Oh.
Soon, the townsfolk were reporting glowing eyes and eerie howls.
Okay.
Detective Hayes, our lead in this part of the story, was initially highly skeptical.
Right.
He chalked it up to local folklore and mass hysteria.
Okay.
But even he had to admit something felt off about the nature of the attacks.
So what shifted his perspective from dismissing it as folklore to thinking there might be something genuinely unusual happening?
The turning point was the death of Miss Clara.
Oh, Miss Clara.
Now, she was a bit of a local eccentric, known for her herbal remedies and the occasional odd pronouncement.
Okay.
Hayes found her cabin in a state of absolute chaos. The claw marks on the walls were described as being unusually high.
Right.
And more disturbingly,
Almost.
deliberate.
Deliberate claw mark.
Deliberate.
That's a detail that certainly steers you away from a typical animal attack.
It does. Then, and this is where it gets really interesting, they found a tuft of wiry black fur snagged on a broken door.
So what did the analysis of that fur reveal?
This is where the expected werewolf narrative really starts to unravel for us. The lab results came back, canine DNA, but with completely unknown genetic markers. The lab technician who handled it was apparently quite perplexed.
Yeah.
It wasn't a match for any known wolf or domestic dog.
What kind of creature leaves behind such a biological puzzle?
That's the question,
Yeah.
isn't it? Hayes, realizing this wasn't fitting any natural explanation, started looking beyond the town's myths toward something potentially more scientific.
It's fascinating here how the initial interpretation, the werewolf, is a readily available cultural explanation for something frightening.
Yeah,
But the DNA evidence forces a shift in perspective,
absolutely.
doesn't it?
It does.
It makes you consider less conventional possibilities.
Yeah.
Where did Hayes' investigation lead him next?
Well, it led him to the outskirts of Briarwood, to an unmarked research facility owned by a Dr. Blackwell. Now, Blackwell was a recluse, and the facility was shrouded in local rumors, whispers of groundbreaking experiments, secretive investors, and you guessed it, strange howls echoing from the property at night.
A secluded research facility with unusual sounds. It's almost a caricature of the clandestine operation.
It is.
How did Hayes decide to approach this situation?
He planned for the next full moon.
Okay.
He assembled a SWAT team.
Wow, a SWAT team.
I imagine there were some raised eyebrows at the briefing.
You bet.
And they set up a perimeter around Blackwell's lab, waiting to see what or who might emerge.
That must have been a tense waiting game.
Oh, absolutely.
What did they encounter when the full moon rose?
Well, what emerged wasn't the stuff of folklore. It was a massive canine,
Okay.
but twisted, unnatural. Witnesses described eyes that seemed to possess an unsettling intelligence. And its movements weren't just feral.
Right.
They were described as calculated when it attacked.
Yeah.
It was with a frightening precision. The SWAT team opened fire, and while the creature was clearly affected, it didn't stop.
Oh, wow.
It broke through their line, a whirlwind of teeth and claws.
Oh, my goodness.
Absolute chaos.
So, not a mythical beast vulnerable to silver, but something far more resilient?
No.
How did they finally manage to subdue it?
This is where a local element comes back into play.
Okay.
A young boy named Billy, who lived on Miss Clara's farm, appeared with an old rifle. He remembered Clara's seemingly superstitious advice. Aim for the eyes.
Aim for the eyes, huh?
He fired twice. The creature roared more in rage than pain and lunged towards Billy.
Oh.
But Hayes tackled it. managing to pin it down. Now, while wrestling with this incredibly strong creature, Hayes felt a syringe embedded in its side.
A syringe? That immediately points to some kind of biological manipulation, doesn't it?
Exactly. Suddenly, the unknown DNA started to make a terrifying kind of sense.
Yeah.
In a desperate move, Hayes pulled the syringe out and plunged it back into the creature.
Oh.
It convulsed violently, let out a choked cry, and then went limp. It wasn't a supernatural weakness that stopped it, but likely a concentrated dose of whatever had transformed it.
Right.
Science, twisted and misused, was the key.
That's a chilling revelation. So what happened after? Blackwell was apprehended, I assume.
Immediately. The aftermath was a scene. Law enforcement, forensic teams, even specialists in biological hazards.
Wow.
Blackwell was arrested and his research was confiscated. The werewolf legend of Briarwood, while perhaps not forgotten, was certainly recontextualized into something far more disturbing and grounded in the potential and perhaps the dangers of scientific advancement.
And what about Billy? He showed remarkable bravery, or perhaps naivete, in that moment.
He was hospitalized but thankfully recovered.
Okay.
When Hayes visited him, Billy mentioned his grandfather had loaded that antique rifle with silver bullets, just in case. Hayes just offered a knowing look.
Right.
Superstition or coincidence.
Yeah.
That night, something extraordinary happened.
It really blurs those boundaries between the known and the unknown, doesn't it?
It does.
It makes you think about the responsibility that comes with scientific progress.
Absolutely.
Now shifting gears entirely, our next investigation. The ghostwriter seems to explore a different kind of constructed reality.
It does indeed. This case centers around a detective named Moreau. But Moreau wasn't just solving crimes. He was a celebrated author, penning best-selling novels.
Wow.
Based on the very unsolved murders he was investigating.
So he's writing about the crimes he's supposed to be solving?
He was, and Moreau was a master of presentation.
Okay.
He staged crime scenes with a theatrical flair.
Oh, wow.
Almost like performance art.
Yeah.
And the public was absolutely captivated by his perceived brilliance.
A detective who's also a celebrity author?
Yeah.
That's a potent combination and potentially a dangerous one.
Yeah.
It sounds like the line between crime solving and storytelling was practically non-existent for him.
Precisely. And that's where our next key figure comes in. Sarah, a journalist with a sharp, cynical mind. She saw through Moreau's carefully crafted persona and suspected his dramatic solutions were nothing more than staged events designed to fuel his literary career.
A skeptical journalist is always a welcome element in these kinds of investigations.
Oh, sure.
What was the catalyst that really made Sarah dig deeper?
It was a murder that deviated sharply from Moreau's established pattern.
Oh.
This crime scene was messy, brutal, devoid of any of his usual artistic touches.
So completely different.
Yeah. It posed a critical question. Was it a copycat trying to mimic his style?
Okay.
Had Moreau made a rare mistake?
Or, more unsettlingly, had a genuine, uncontrolled killer emerged?
Right.
Perhaps inspired by Moreau's own sensationalized accounts.
That kind of inconsistency would certainly raise red flags for someone like Sarah.
It would.
How did she react to this unexpected development?
It intensified her suspicion.
She began meticulously reviewing Moreau's old cases, comparing the actual police reports and evidence with his highly dramatized versions in his books. She started to uncover inconsistencies, small but significant details that didn't align.
So she had her doubts and some discrepancies.
She did.
How did she confront Moreau with her findings?
In a rather bold and direct move.
Okay.
She slipped him an anonymous note.
A note.
It contained a single, piercing question. What detail did only the killer know?
What detail did only the killer know?
It was a direct challenge to his carefully constructed narrative, forcing him to confront the possibility that he wasn't the sole author of these stories.
That's a high-stakes tactic.
It is.
What was the immediate aftermath of that note?
The very next crime scene held a chilling answer.
Okay.
Hidden amidst Moreau's usual theatrical staging was a crude message, scrawled in what appeared to be blood.
Oh.
I see you.
I see you.
It was raw, menacing, and it completely flipped the power dynamic.
Wow.
Moreau was no longer the sole manipulator of the narrative. Someone else was now part of the story.
Right.
A terrifying co-author.
That's genuinely unsettling. It sounds like Sarah's question struck a nerve.
It did.
How did she then confront him directly?
She presented him with all the inconsistencies she had unearthed, her evidence laid out before him, and accused him outright of staging the earlier crimes for his books. Now, you might expect denial or outrage,
Right.
but Moreau's reaction was deeply disturbing.
Oh.
He seemed almost Thrilled.
Thrilled. That suggests a profound disconnect from reality.
It does.
What did he do next?
He revealed his true motivation in a shocking and violent way. He attacked Sarah.
He attacked her.
It wasn't some intricate plot involving a shadowy accomplice. It was Moreau himself attempting to silence her permanently.
So the brilliant detective wasn't just fabricating crime scenes.
Yeah.
He was prepared to commit actual violence to maintain his fabricated reality.
He was.
Did Sarah manage to defend herself?
It was a brutal, desperate fight for survival. Nothing like the stylized violence in Moreau's novels. But Sarah, driven by her commitment to uncovering the truth, fought back with everything she had. In the end, she managed to overpower him, exposing the self-proclaimed master of crime as a common criminal himself.
A stark contrast between the fictionalized violence in his books and the messy reality of their confrontation.
It was.
What was the fallout from this dramatic turn of events?
The trial, as you can imagine, was a media circus.
I bet.
Sarah, the journalist who exposed the celebrated detective, became an overnight sensation.
Wow.
Even behind bars. Moreau continued to seek fame, attempting to control the narrative from his prison cell.
Oh, gosh.
He even offers Sarah a co-writing credit on his memoirs.
Really?
A cut of the profits from his life behind bars.
The audacity is astounding.
It is.
What was Sarah's response to such a twisted offer?
She refused. She chose to walk away from the spotlight, the potential wealth, and the sensationalism. She realized her true interest lay in uncovering and sharing genuine stories, not in becoming a character in someone else's dangerous fiction.
A powerful decision. But you mentioned an unsettling final detail.
I did, sometime later, in her regular haunt, a local bar. The bartender slid a newly published book across the counter towards Sarah.
No way.
"From your biggest fan," he muttered,
Oh my goodness.
indicating it was Moreau's latest work, already a bestseller. It was the chilling reminder that Sarah's entanglement with Moreau's distorted world might not be entirely over.
That's so creepy.
And more disturbingly, it underscored the public's seemingly insatiable appetite for sensational narratives, regardless of the ethical cost or the real victims involved.
Absolutely.
That kind of public fascination can be a very dangerous force.
This case really delves into the dark side of ambition, the seductive nature of fame, and the perilous consequences when the line between reality and fiction becomes irrevocably blurred.
Exactly. And it forces you to consider the immense responsibility that falls upon storytellers, whether they are detectives writing books or journalists reporting the news.
Right.
What role does the public play in creating these kinds of figures, these individuals who will stop at nothing for recognition and control over their narrative?
It raises a critical point about our own consumption of these stories, doesn't it?
It does.
Are we in some way complicit in creating the very monsters we are so fascinated by?
Well, Julia, that brings us to the end of this particularly unsettling investigation into two cases that really push the boundaries of the strange and the criminal.
Both investigations offered a compelling, and at times disturbing, blend of the familiar and the utterly unexpected. We saw the collision of age-old folklore with cutting-edge science, and the unsettling erosion of the lines that are supposed to separate those who investigate crime from those who perpetrate it.
So for you, our listener, here's a final thought to ponder. In a world increasingly saturated with information and competing narratives, how do we effectively distinguish between genuine threats and those that are carefully constructed, whether in a laboratory or within the manipulative mind of an individual?
That's a tough one.
And what are the unintended consequences of our collective fascination with the macabre and the mysterious?
Deeply thought-provoking questions, Adrian.
Thanks for joining us for this investigation on the True Detectives podcast. If these strange tales have piqued your interest, please rate and follow the show for more explorations into the darker or more unusual corners of the investigative world. Until our next investigation.
Stay vigilant, everyone.